Well, good afternoon or good morning to all of you, depending on where you may be viewing from. It's great to have you with us. This is the Hunt Institute's Early Efforts webinar. We'll be underway here in just a moment as we get everybody into the room. But in the meantime, I encourage you to jump into the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're watching from. It's always a treat to see all of these locations scroll by. Well, why don't we go ahead and kick into gear? It's again great to have you with us. Happy Monday. I'm Jan Worry. I'm the Senior Director of Early Learning at the Hunt Institute, which is located in Cary, North Carolina. If you were joining us for the first time today, you may know or may not know if you're joining for the first time. The Institute is an education policy support to the nation's governors and state lawmakers, founded in 2001 by Jim Hunt, who served 4 terms as the governor of North Carolina. We support the education continuum from prenatal on up through post-secondary, but our early efforts series here is our early childhood focused webinar. So we like to talk about the early years once a month as we pull together here. We've got a fantastic conversation today. We're going to talk, as you may have noticed from the panelists showing up on your screen here, we're going to talk about the importance of men in early childhood today, a topic that is near and dear, I know, to all of our hearts here on the screen. I want to give you just a couple of housekeeping reminders before we get into introductions of our panel. First is that later in the hour, we will take some of your questions. And so if you have a question that you'd like to pose to the panel, if you would drop it into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen down on the Zoom toolbar, that'll help us to keep track of questions. As you can see, the chat itself goes by very, very quickly. And so dropping a question into the chat is a great way for it to get lost in the mix. So if you use the Q&A, then we'll be able to keep track of those, and we'll come and check on those a little bit later in the hour. I want to remind you as well, as always, our early efforts series is closed captioned. And so if you would find that helpful, you can find the closed captioning controls down at the bottom of your screen as well. And then an increasingly popular question, will this webinar be recorded? The answer is yes. And that all of our webinars are recorded. They tend to end up within about 24 hours to 48 hours on our YouTube channel. So all you need to do is go to YouTube and search the Hunt Institute, and it will pull right up, and you'll be able to find not only this session, but all of our many back sessions. Lots of great content for you to choose from there as you go. So let's talk about men in early childhood. I'm thrilled to welcome our guest today. Eddie Maniszak is Executive Director of Early Childhood at the Ouachita Intermediate School District in Michigan, and also the co-chair of the AASA Early Learning Cohort. Dr. Calvin Moore is Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Professional Recognition. And Mike Marshall is kindergarten teacher at Cottonwood Elementary School in Yakima, Washington. And guys, it's great to have all of you with us today. And, you know, typically at this point in these conversations, we'd kind of jump right in and start sort of talking about the policy conversation. But I think, you know, in this particular case, maybe useful for our viewers to get to know each of you a little, and I'll count myself maybe in that mix as well, as a former kindergarten teacher and classroom assistant. You know, I've had the good fortune to work at pretty much every. You know, we talk about the career ladder, the early childhood career ladder. I think I've worked at most every rung of the career ladder over almost 30 years. So let's talk to each of you a little bit about sort of how you got connected to this work. And Mike, obviously you are the one of the 4 of us that is still actively in the classroom. How is it that you came into the early childhood field and became a kindergarten teacher?
Yeah, so it's kind of a long-winded story. So I'll start at high school. I graduated high school, and like most 18-year-olds, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do moving forward. And so I knew I probably should continue my education. So I went to our local community college and was just kind of doing a general studies with some focus on business. And I did really well in those courses. I felt like I was excelling in them, but just wasn't really something that struck as a passion for me. So I just kind of was doing them to move forward in my education. And then funny enough, we had a family barbecue and some neighbors came over, and one of my neighbors was asking how school was going, and I told her it was good. I just wasn't really feeling passionate in it. And so she suggested that she'd see me work with kids and my nieces and nephews and kids in the neighborhood. And she suggested that I should try, looking into teaching. And so I never really had thought about that moving forward. And I graduated or got my AA at my community college, and then transferred to University of Idaho, and decided to start in elementary education. And it just quickly became clear that I did well at this, and really enjoyed it. It didn't seem like work for me. It was more fun and just more enjoyable. And I got a sense of happiness from it, I guess. And so I graduated from U of I, and was lucky enough to do my student teaching back in my hometown of Yakima. And I student taught at Atanum Elementary, which is in the current district that we're in. And jobs started popping up that next summer for openings in our district, and I wanted to stay local too because my family is all here. And I saw a kindergarten position open up at Cottonwood, and I just really wasn't sure if that was it for me, because I was really kind of more focused on 3rd and 4th grade, maybe 5th grade. But everybody told me a job's a job. You can do anything for a year. And so I took that job in kindergarten at Cottonwood, and here I am. This is my 10th year in the same building and same grade level. So.
But 10 years in kindergarten. What? So was it a surprise, Mike, to find how much you enjoyed the kindergarten experience after you were thinking maybe working with a little bit older kids?
Yes, 100%. And I think a big testament to why I enjoy it so much is my coworkers. I've had great principals and great administration and a wonderful team. So that, I think, definitely played a big role into why I enjoy it so much still to this day.
Well, I tell you, when you talk about the happiness that you found in the classroom, boy, that really resonates with me. I can't say I've ever loved any job more than teaching kindergarten, and so it really is a joyful experience. Eddie, let's bring you into the conversation. I know you began your career as a kindergarten teacher as well.
Yeah, no, I did. Thanks, Dan. And I also want to say thanks for the invite to be here today with this wonderful panel. No, actually, a similar story to Mike's. My mother-in-law is the one who invited me. I went to school. I thought I was going to be a professional football player, and it didn't work out. I thought, and I got on the field. I'm like, oh boy, this isn't working out for me. So I actually was a business major when I started college, and my wife's then girlfriend's mom owned and operated her own preschool. And she said, you might want to come and volunteer. And so I did. And about 15 minutes into that experience, I thought, this is the greatest thing I've never knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It was amazing. And I'm a first generation college student, so I didn't really know what to expect. But then I went back to school that next year, started volunteering in the local Head Start classroom. And then I transferred schools. I started out in Michigan at a small Division III school playing football there. And then I transferred to Butler University in Indianapolis. And then I came into another mentor, Dr. Ina Shelley, who then became the dean eventually of the College of Ed there. And she really was instrumental in my development as a professional, and specifically in early childhood ed, because my undergraduate degree was in early childhood ed. So then I actually was lucky enough to get my job before I ended before I even did my student teaching experience. My building principal hired me, and he came and observed me when I was student teaching. And then while I was student teaching, I simultaneously went to staff meetings. and I got everyone's dream. My first year teaching kindergarten, I got to buy all of my equipment and all of my supplies.
Oh, wow.
It was a brand new multi-year, multi-age school in Indianapolis that I taught at. It was a fantastic experience teaching kindergarten there. And then my wife and I made the decision to come back to Michigan. And lo and behold, the state of Michigan didn't have an undergraduate degree and for early childhood ed. So I ended up having to go back to student teach, and I had to student teach again. So, but no, I taught first grade and kindergarten. So for a total of 8 years, I was in the classroom, and it was the toughest decision to make, to leave my classroom and leave that intimate relationship I know Mike has with his children and families. I was elementary building principal. And then when I was in that agency in that district, I ended up starting my own, starting for the district, a preschool program for that district, and was director of early childhood ed, and then assistant soup, and then soup, and now as the executive director for early childhood at the Washtenaw Intermediate School District, which is a regional service agency, and I help to coordinate the early childhood programming for the entire county. But it was a really tough decision to leave the classroom, and that's why, as I mentioned earlier, I try to get into a classroom on a weekly basis, just to remain grounded in being with kids and being present. It's just the best thing to be around kids. So I'm grateful for the start and the opportunity that I had in education thus far.
Eddie, I love that story of just taking a few minutes to realize that this was the place for you. I think I had very much that same experience. I had begun another career. My bachelor's degree is in journalism. Was working in radio, and had a family friend who was running an after-school program and was short-staffed one day, and she called me up really in desperate need of some support the next day, and asked if I would come. And truly, it just took minutes before I realized that I had made a terrible mistake, and really was meant to work with kids. What happened? What did you experience in that 15 minutes? What turned the switch for you and let you know this was the right place?
It was just this instantaneous combustion of energy and desire to make a difference, because I knew I wanted to try and make differences in the lives of families, because I had a cousin who was in social work, and I talked to him. So midway through my freshman year, I switched to social work after a business major. And I thought, why would I want to be a social worker when I could work with children? And it was just so special. I call it the Peter Pan syndrome. I never wanted to grow up. And when you're around young children, you never grow up. You are only as old as you feel.
Very, very true. Calvin, let's hear a little bit about your story. I know, am I right? I think your career started in Head Start.
That's right, Dan. But not unlike Mike and Eddie, I was also introduced to this field by a family member. I had served 4 years in the Air Force, and I was coming home trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And my aunt was working at a local Head Start program, and she said, "I know you have an interest in teaching. So why don't you come work for Head Start while you're trying to make the decision about where you want to land?" And I did just that. I started working in a local Head Start program as a teacher aide, and the rest is history. That was in 1991. 1992, I earned my CDA and really felt connected to the field, really felt that this was something I was passionate about. Like Eddie, I thought I wanted to be a news anchor for a local television station. In fact, my initial undergraduate career path was in communications. But once I started working for that local Head Start program, as Eddie just mentioned, and as Michael probably experiences every day, the children won me over. I really felt like I was making a difference in my local community working with these children, and I never wanted to stop. And so that's how I got my start. And I'm thankful because I really still feel that I want to make a difference for young children, even in my current position.
Fantastic. Let me encourage you again. If you we'll jump to questions here in a few minutes. So if you want to drop your questions into the Q&A, we've got a couple already in there. Calvin, let me continue with you for just a second, because I think first important in this conversation, now that we've heard a little bit of everyone's story, to acknowledge that men are very much not the norm in this field, and I think I know that you would all join me in in acknowledging the amazing contributions of the women in this field. The early childhood field is 97% female. And so, you know, this is we're talking about sort of the exception to the rule, the anomaly. Though, you know, interested to hear your thoughts on how we make it not so much the anomaly. I think, you know, the one unique thing that I hear in all four of our stories is that, you know, we as men, through one method or another, usually it sounds like, you know, somebody close to us offering an opportunity, all really found a lot of joy in working with young kids. And so it's interesting that you know, more males maybe aren't getting that opportunity. I think a lot of them would really find a lot of satisfaction in working in the field. Calvin, I saw a figure recently though that you know, of the 3% that are men working in this field, that 44% exit the field within 5 years. What I know you've done some speaking and some research on this. What is it that is not only preventing men from entering the field, but also maybe having a situation where we're struggling to keep them?
Yeah, it's a stubborn statistic, the 3%, particularly in early education. And you're right, Dan. Most research says that by the end of 2 to 3 years, most of those men exit the field for some reason. I think it's three things that I would point to in terms of retention. I think sometimes there's a lack of connection to the field for men because it is considered a place where women thrive. And so programs may not have the right systems in place to really have men connect to the field that would cause them to want to stay. And I think that that's one thing I would suggest to folks, that if you build places where men feel comfortable and welcomed, they will stay and attract other men into the program. The second thing is that I really feel that salaries and benefits is a hindrance for men staying in the field. I think if we want to really improve and attract men and retain them, we really have to look at our financing structure and how programs are positioned to support men as they support families and other things that they want to do in their life. And then finally, I think because society views this work as women's work, there is this notion that men feel pressured once they start teaching to leave the classroom and become an administrator or do other adjacent work to teaching. And I know I felt that pressure because I was a really great teacher. They thought I'd make a really great Head Start Center director. And I felt that pressure. I remember the argument that my supervisor made. She said to me, well, you can duplicate your skills in other teachers if I put you in this administrative position. But the joy I found with those children every day did not compare to the work as an administrator. And so I think those are the three things I would point to as why men sort of leave the field.
So Mike, you are sort of the exception to this rule, having spent 10 years now in kindergarten. What has kept you there?
Well, it sounds kind of cliche, but I really do like what I do. I enjoy seeing the kids every day, their smiles, their tears, whatever it may be. It doesn't feel like work. I think that's the biggest thing that I take away every day is I don't feel like I have to go to this job. I get to go. And so I just really enjoy what I do. And I again, kind of full circle is going back to, I really love who I work with. And I think that plays a big role in the enjoyment that I get from a professional standpoint too, is just having those relationships with my coworkers as well. And then being able to see the families. Like I have certain families that I've had 3 of their children, you know, in the last 10 years, and building those relationships, I think is super important for the community. And like when they come to an open house night and they have, you know, a 3-year-old and they're like, oh, we'll see you in a couple of years. You know, it's just really, it's really nice to have those conversations with those families and play that role. And I really feel lucky to be doing what I'm doing.
Any way in? What is this conversation raising in your mind?
Well, for me, it is about, you know, how can I make an impact in the lives of children and families? And when I was a teacher, it was that family unit on an individual basis. That was that was a hard decision to decide to become elementary building principal. But I knew that by doing that, I was elevating the sphere of influence in a major way to that building, and then transitioning into an assistant superintendent's role. Then you're influencing a district, and as a superintendent, it's community, and now in the role I have, it's a county. And I think that's, a lot can be said if we're in positions where we can have impact in early childhood education, in a way and in a manner that's expansive as well as it is organic. I think that there's some power into that. I have to give credit though, and this is, something that just came out last year, that I believe it was the state superintendent of Idaho. She's a female, and here she was making influences on a state level, and decided to go back into the classroom. And guess where she went? Into kindergarten. And so she resorted back into that. So who knows where I'll end up near the end of my career, because I love being around children and teaching, but at the same time I know there's a responsibility, and I that was instilled in me by my mentor, by Dr. Shelley at Butler. When I was there, she said, this is a great responsibility. It is a great responsibility to be in the lives of children, and you're always being watched. Everyone, there's never a time where you're not being watched or looked at or observed. And it's interesting because I want to circle back to Calvin's comment about the idea that you have to develop this camaraderie amongst people, and specifically being a man in early childhood, you have to have other men in early childhood. And so just last Thursday, I was invited to participate in one of our local programs, had a 1 Million Man March. It was an effort by this early childhood center to get more men to be involved. So when I was there, I was greeting families, greeting people. Dads were encouraged, male caregivers were encouraged to bring children into that center that day. And the men's basketball team from Eastern Michigan University was there. And you should have seen the looks on these little ones' faces as they're walking in, seeing these 6'10", 6 foot, whatever, how tall these kids are. And these, and I asked them, I said, so who here is interested in education? And there was one player who said, yeah, I'm considering it. So I was like, we need to connect. Let's talk, because I want to make sure that we can get you in, because we need men in early childhood education.
Calvin, you said something that was really interesting as we were going through the last answer. You talked about creating environments where men feel that they fit in and feel like they are welcomed. And I think one thing we do know is that as much as there is conversation around the need for more men in early childhood, it's not always a comfortable situation. In fact, there's a question in the chat that sort of speaks to this question of sort of the suspicion, maybe even, that men are looked at as they enter this field. What was your experience? Did you have experiences where maybe you didn't feel welcomed into the world of early childhood?
I don't know if I would go that far, Dan, but I do believe I felt societal views sort of encroaching on my work. In other words, I felt the strange looks, the turning of the heads when they passed me sometimes in the hallway. They were surprised that I was teaching, especially that first year. But after that first year, people were clamoring to get in my classroom. So it's that initial shock of seeing a man. I was the only male teacher in the center, so it was a shock to parents that first year. But all it took was 12 months, and there was a complete turnaround, both with the staff who worked with me and also the parents who experienced what I had to offer as a male teacher. I didn't mind paint on the floor. I didn't mind, a messy classroom. I didn't mind having children be free to express themselves. It was a different experience, I think, as Mike can attest to, being in my classroom as a male teacher, that I think really resonated with the parents at my center.
And Mike, I know, from our prior conversation, sounds like you've had a very positive experience in that regard.
Yeah, I never felt any kind of way in the beginning, even my first year. In fact, my very first year and the years leading after that, I actually had a lot of families requesting me just to fill that, in quotes again, that strong male role model that some of these kids don't necessarily have access to. And so that was definitely what I felt like was my role, especially early on, before my coworkers kind of made it a point to make it more of a balance, because I did have some tougher kids, especially early on, that needed that that extra love and support from a male role model. So I've had a great experience from the beginning, but I will speak that there always does feel to be a slight stigma to it. I am very cautious about how I interact with children and move on with that too. So, but yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I think that that was a lesson that was instilled in me very early in my career too. One of the things that really startled me from the beginning. I actually had a family. It's a family I'd never even met, but a family that found out when the teacher assignments were made, found out that their child was going to be in my classroom, and actually pulled the child out of the school and decided to go to a different school. Rather than participate in that, and to their credit, Calvin, to your point of sort of maybe there's some initial stigma, and then people come, quite some time later they actually came and acknowledged that that was the wrong move, and that they actually wish that that maybe they had stayed. But even something as simple, Eddie, I'm curious to hear your experiences, because the other thing that stands out in my mind too is very early on, I think during my first week teaching, I was out, at the end of the school day on kind of car rider duty, helping kids get to their parents as they were being picked up. And a child came, not even one in my class, just child came, and as they were getting ready to go home for the day, came over, gave me a big bear hug, and kind of took me by surprise, came up from behind and gave me a big hug, and then ran off to the car. That parent drove directly to the front office and wanted to know who that man was that was hugging the children. And so there is some level of distrust or discomfort there, particularly early on. Did you experience any of that early in your career?
I dispelled that. I tried to dispel that right away. I scheduled home visits or neutral site visits with every one of my kindergartners. And this was about the time that the Kindergarten Cop, the movie, had come out. So, I think that was an interesting, kind of, a part of, the identity, because I would reference that a lot to say, I'm not a police officer disguising as a kindergarten teacher. I'm actually a man as a kindergarten teacher. And the other thing that I had that worked against me was when I was younger, I looked like I was about 12. So I vividly remember going to these houses of these families, knocking on their door, and the looks that they had on their face were like, oh my God, you're the kindergarten teacher? And I'm like, yep, that's me. I'm here to visit. And so I read a story and got to know the children and introduced myself to the family. And I think by doing that, it kind of put everyone's fears at ease a little bit of my, who I was and what I was about, and making them feel comfortable and warm. And it sure taught me a lot about my very, very, diverse classes that I had when I first started teaching, because people often associate maybe the state of Indiana to be this, very racially homogeneous state, but my goodness, Indianapolis is a very racially diverse city. And I was so fortunate. I had so many languages spoken and so many children from so many different, races in my class. It was an absolutely wonderful experience. And circling back to what Mike had said about having the support of your building administration, I was lucky enough that the principal I had, he was just so supportive of having a man in kindergarten. And that really made a difference. And it made me feel empowered to be the person that I felt I could be in the classroom, and having the positive experience that I did.
So let's jump into some of the audience questions here in the Q&A. And again, if you have a question, please feel free to pop it in there, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. But Rachel is asking a good question that seems like a good follow-up to what we've just been talking about. She's asking, how did you navigate the social norms and the peer pressure of being a man in early childhood as we came up in our careers? And in particular, what would you tell at this point? Eddie, you talked about that the basketball player who expressed maybe some interest. What would you tell other young men maybe who are considering the field but might wonder about the kind of social norms and gender stigma associated with it?
Yeah, no, I actually have had this conversation often as either a principal or assistant soup or as a soup with men who are hired in education to say, specifically in the early grades and early childhood ed, that you have to be very cognizant and very aware of who you are and how you present, and you just have to make sure that you are always being in a precautionary measure. At sometimes I always would allow children to approach me, but I turn for the side. I never, I tried, if they came full throttle, like last week, I had a little guy come up to me in the preschool class I was reading to, literally came and wrapped his whole arms around, what am I going to do? Turn aside? No, I gave him a big hug, right on. But I just know that being very careful of that, and then also just making sure that as men in early childhood education too, especially with toileting, I think there's a phobia, that men can't do that. And so when I was a principal, my kindergarten teacher, who was female, she would call me on the phone, in her classroom phone, because she had it was really horrible, because she had this kind of knee-jerk medical reaction to when there was either feces or emesis in a classroom, and she'd be called, Eddie, I need you to come, and she'd like be hiccuping, please come, because I'd be like, I'll be right there. I could do it. So I'd be down there helping to clean up after a child who had an accident of some type or nature. And it just never really bothered me. But you have to be very cognizant, because, there's just that phobia that men aren't supposed to be around little children that, maybe need help with their diaper, or, if they needed help getting them cleaned up after they had an accident. And I would always caution with someone, if possible, especially as a man, to have another adult present to dispel those accusations, if there were ever any accusations, because that is a real concern as a male in ECE, that you don't have that capability. But we are nurturing, we are loving people. I'm so lucky, because I have two sons myself who are now fully grown, and I feel so fortunate that that gave me such practice, and gave me the power to feel like I could do those things. And so I was very grateful for that.
Dan, I think we have to always communicate these kinds of stereotypes, and even dispel some of these myths. I'm a father of two daughters. I changed their diapers as a father, and learned that skill, pretty well as a father. Never had to do that as a professional teacher, but I am a professional. I mean, when I earned my credential with a CDA, a bachelor's degree, a master's, it says to the community where I'm serving that I'm a professional, and whatever skills and abilities that profession trained me to do, I should be able to exercise that in my career as a professional. And I think that having the support of the other professionals in your classroom and in your center was really a big help to me. So I never had to really fight that part of what Eddie was describing, because everyone viewed me as a professional in the environment. But I did have a benefit, because as a Head Start teacher, I always had an assistant in the classroom with me. And I think that helped parents and others in the center really fully accept me as a professional. I don't know what it means to work with young children without that extra pair of hands and that extra set of eyes in the classroom. But I would imagine that would be an enormous challenge.
I want to jump.
Oh,
go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say too, just like we're talking about these new men looking and interested in the field, and I think just it's important to remind them to let their passion outweigh the stigma. I think that, they shouldn't be held back being passionate about something when they can really, really make a big difference in hundreds, if not thousands of kids' lives. So just reminding them that too.
Is there other advice, Mike, that you would give if a younger guy came to you and said, "Hey, I'm considering this"? What would you tell them about the experience?
I would invite him to come and hang out. I come and see what I do, hop right in. And I think that's the best. Granted, you have to go to school and go to college and get a degree and to be certified in teaching. I will say, I think I learned more in my first year of teaching than I learned in 4 years of college, personally. Just hopping in and getting right in there and figuring out how it's supposed to work and how you can make a difference in them. So just come on in.
Absolutely. I want to maybe revisit this question of compensation in the field. Melissa has a great point in the chat that, this is not a male female issue. I mean, right now the early childhood workforce is struggling mightily with a compensation challenge across the board. I mean, frankly, it is difficult to attract teachers, male or female, into this field in part because of compensation. And Melissa's mentioning, as a program provider, struggling with the idea that she might have to pay men more than women. I don't know that that's necessarily what anybody is suggesting, but definitely compensation is a challenge for everyone entering the field. Calvin, how are you seeing that play out with maybe the workforce that that you're dealing with at the council?
Yeah, I've gotten into trouble, Dan, for suggesting that more men in our field would raise benefits and salaries for everyone. But I stand on that argument. But I do agree that everyone in our field, male and female, deserve more pay and access to better benefits. So I advocate for the field writ large in terms of the difficulty. I do believe that for pre-K, that the advent of pre-K around the country has really done enormous good for pre-K teachers. As states fund pre-K efforts, they usually look at the K-12 pay and drive the market toward pay parity for qualified teachers. But usually those programs don't serve infants and toddlers. And so we have a lot of work to do to have pay parity for everyone working with young children, despite their age or the setting in which those children are being served. But I will say that for me, what we try to advocate for is, helping states who are funding these efforts to really think about creative ways to draw men into the field, not to pay them more than women, but to look at other ways to incentivize men coming into the field, whether that's a signing bonus or other creative ways to get them attracted to the field. And the other thing I always say, Dan, to groups looking to do this, start as early as possible, right? And we want people to start attracting men into the field in high school. If we could get young men interested early, then the likelihood that they will stay will increase as well.
Yeah. And you're working through the council with a lot of folks that are in sort of the private childcare sector of the early childhood workforce. I know Eddie and Mike, you're both in school district settings, which certainly is not a get rich quick scheme, but compared to the childcare workforce, is a much more reasonable professional sort of wage. Eddie, have you run into issues with compensation and in attracting?
Yeah, most certainly. We currently have, classrooms that we cannot fill. And, it's interesting because the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, I think this is an interesting statistic, in animal caretakers, yes, they're very important to the workforce. I think that the amount was, on average, their hourly rate was $13.85. And then on average for an early childhood professional was $13.35. And I just know that, to see that disparity, and then the lower the age, the lower the wage is what, has always been the case. And it needs to be flipped. My heart was seeing when Build Back Better was looking as though it could be actually a dream come true. And then it got obviously crushed in defeat. And I know that I just reached out, to some people in the field just recently. In fact, just today, asking them about, because there was a piece in the LA Times recently about how there's this cliff with the affordable, American Rescue Plan dollars evaporating, this $32 billion network of money. And, if that evaporates, 3.2 million children will lose that. And so the safety net of the Build Back Better isn't there to catch them. And the huge issue is this, for all teachers in early childhood education, and especially from, I honestly, for all teachers, not just men, but just this pay disparaging, that is there. And we need to do more. We need to be advocating more. We need to, a subtle shift that I keep telling districts across the nation and the national work that I'm a part of, is that we need to stop talking about K-12 districts. They need to be referred to as P20 institutions, prenatal through age 20. Those children that are just with moms that are pregnant, those are children that are going to come to a district, eventually, and you have to figure out ways to engage with those families early if you're going to make a difference down the road with them. And so they're all, we need to make sure that we're doing better, from advocacy to, a call to, what can we do to make a difference for the pay that we have for our early childhood professionals. And that's my hope, is that we can somehow convince those that are in the legislative process, both on a state and congressional level, that this is a very, very important topic that we need to never give up on, because we need to make sure that our early childhood professionals are treated as professionals, not just by how we act toward them, but by how they're compensated as well.
Mike, I want to pose a question. Jacob is asking a question in the chat that sort of talks about the masculine archetypes, and it's interesting that frequently men who are employed in education, in some cases, are seen as like, oh, that's the teacher that the challenging discipline cases may need to go to, or that men are frequently hired into administrative roles to be like the disciplinarian in the school. How do you avoid feeding into that sort of stereotype of what it means to be a man in early childhood?
That's a great question. I don't know. I speaking from personal experience, I just kind of be myself. I don't take a certain role on. I don't take a disciplinary role. I don't overstep. I kind of stay within my lane. I don't discipline other kids in other classes because I am a man. I just kind of stay in my lane and work within my team. But yeah, I think I just kind of stay in my own space and worry about myself. I don't feel like I need to overstep another teacher just to fill that role or play that role.
Yeah. Eddie and Calvin, did you experience any of that?
I did. I think that there is some difference between the way men and women nurture young children. Sometimes I could accomplish what a female teacher can't simply by using my tone of voice. And so there was that difference. So I would have frequently during my career as a teacher, other teachers stop by with a disciplinary issue. But I found that I executed that with joy as well, because I thought it was just what I brought to the table as a male teacher. So I was often happy to assist, but it did become overwhelming after a while. And I remember, Dan, in particular, I think it was in the early 90s, I began to use the president. I remember having a picture of President Bush at the time in my room. And when those disciplinary problems came, I would tell the children to go talk to the president about it. So you have to find tools to alleviate some of the pressure when you are the only man in the center and everybody's depending on you that way. So I depended on the president, whoever it was at the time, to help me with those problems.
Eddie, how about you? Were you the go-to disciplinarian as a kindergarten teacher?
More as a first grade teacher, I think, because I had colleagues that were all female. And so I would be the one that, would have the ability to maybe, have that conversation with a little guy or a little person in the idea that maybe it was a different point of view or a different perspective. It just worked out that, it was, I think, a good combination, for me, because I was able to step into a space to offer either that advice or redirection in a developmentally appropriate way that maybe they're not seeing at home. Or if there's a house that didn't have a male influence in it, whether it was a grandfather or a father or an uncle or a brother, I know that sometimes those children would also gravitate toward me just to have, and those are the moments that I felt that I was making a huge impact, for those children specifically. And so I, in all my careers choices that I've taken since then, I've always tried to have that kind of mindset of how can I assist? What can I do to help? So.
I will say too, you kind of reflecting after you guys are talking, I have had instances where other teachers have had students come to me and talk to me, but I felt like it was less of a disciplinary stance and more of like a relational stance. I was able to relate to these certain kids who are having a tough time. So I don't think it was because I'm a man. I just think I was able to connect with them differently. And maybe it was because I am a man, but I didn't feel that way. I just felt like I was able to connect with them and get on their level and relate to them and build that relationship. So that's what I'll say on that too.
Calvin, Devon's asking a question in the chat that, frankly, I don't know that I've seen good data on, but she's is asking why do you think Black men aren't attracted or retained in the field of early childhood? I think we have ample evidence that men in general aren't. Have you seen any data? I know you've done some writing and speaking on this topic recently. Is there data that suggests that Black men are maybe even more difficult to attract into the field?
I think they are, and I think it's just societal's view of the profession in general. And I think that Black men may be more sensitive to society's views on this issue. But there are efforts, there are programs around the country trying to attract Black men to the field for that reason, that we're needed in the field in certain communities. And so we have to change the narrative for those men, whether they're in high school or in college, thinking about careers. But I think that Black men are somewhat more sensitive to societal views about early childhood education.
Great question in the chat as well, about what it will really take. The commenter is saying that, relying on joy and serendipity. And it's funny that all four of our stories, I feel like, have some element of that, right? That we all got exposed to this work in a way that, we have this aha moment of, wow, this is a really incredible thing to do. But that, commenter is suggesting you can't necessarily rely on joy and serendipity as being the ways to fill the pipeline. So are there specific ways, she's asking whether municipalities and or schools can really attract and retain male teachers? Calvin, you mentioned like signing bonuses. Are there other ways that have proven effective?
Well, I know there's My Brother's Teacher fellowship in Washington State that is very successful in introducing the early childhood field to high school students. And they've done an exceptional job in introducing the career field in a way that attracts males to the field and retain them. The other thing that I would say is that if you reach critical mass at your center, which happened at a center in a local Head Start program that I studied, they had a male teacher in every classroom. The director was male. The bus driver was male. They had a male person in the, cooking the food in the kitchen. So they had reached critical mass. So if you could ever have a system, an HR system that recruits men in all positions, not just the teaching positions, it will become an attractive place for men and you'll see that men begot men in those circumstances.
Another,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, Dan, I think we need to normalize the experience. We need to make sure that, like Calvin had mentioned, the idea that if you have experiences with other individuals that are men, it's great to have that fellowship, but also to know that if other people are seeing that and other men are seeing that it's normalized to have men in ECE, then I think that is an attractor to the program. A great example, we have this wonderful community-based organization that a colleague and I had visited about 3 weeks ago, and they had these really strong men of color that were in this program. One was an assistant teacher, and another was kind of this ABA therapist that was in there. And when you see men around children, especially men of color, in a program, I think that sends such a powerful message that this is a space for all. And I think that as a white cisgender male in early childhood education, I think that there's other strains of acceptance out there too. Diversity takes many shapes and forms, and we need to normalize that in our society. And I think we're working toward that, but we're nowhere near that. And I think we just need to continue to be advocates and share that it is a great profession to be a part of. I know that a lot of people, specifically, over the last few years, because of whatever we're, in public ed and private ed are dealing with, have said, oh, it's a hard profession to be a part of. But I can, look at Mike and see, there's joy in when he's describing being with his class, his face lights up. And I know for Calvin and I, talking about our roles in education, we love this, and it goes beyond a job for us, for me, and instilling that and showing someone else that it can be beyond a job, I think is a key to attracting men in education and men in early childhood ed.
Mike, I wanted to ask you about that. I know the commenter sort of began with, we can't rely on joy and serendipity, but in some ways, I really would point to that as part of the key. I mean, I just think back to even your opening comments about how it doesn't feel like going to work. It's it's something that you're excited that you get to do instead of that it's something that you have to do. How can we get more men to just to have that experience? How do we need more family friends and family members who are encouraging this, apparently, because all four of us, I think, had that experience. How do we get more guys to see the potential here?
I think just getting it out there, getting the word out there, and trying, things like this, being able to meet together and just have a conversation. I've had, Dr. Finch has come down to me a couple of times and mentioned maybe getting a small meeting together, meeting with like the high school football team to talk about my experience and how I started and my whole experience. And so just being able to get things like that together and get the word out there. And it is not all sunshine and rainbows and butterflies, and there are hard days and days that I go home and just want to put my face in a pillow and not talk to anybody. I mean, but I will speak to the fact that you do have to be passionate about it. I think that, you can't just hire a male teacher just because he's a man. I think that is kind of going a step backwards. We need good teachers, men and women, and ones that are passionate. I think it starts with the passion. So.
We're nearing the top of the hour, and Calvin, I don't want to miss the opportunity. I know that we've been speaking mostly about this question of gender, but I want to relate it in part to the work that you're doing at the Council for Professional Recognition with the Child Development Associate credential, because I know that was an important part of your story as well, and maybe an important part of how to this question of compensation. How does a credential like the CDA maybe help to advance both male and female teachers in the field as they're looking to seek more compensation and recognition professionally?
I think that's what we're learning, Dan, that the Child Development Associate credential is really an entry level credential that verifies that a young person or even a person that's entering the field for the first time is competent to work with young children. Uh, I think an outcome of having earned the credential, as we're seeing in the space, is that most people either earn a pay increase or a promotion opportunity. And I think that's one reason why we encourage folks to seek our credential. If they're working in a pre-K environment and they don't have a credential like a bachelor's degree, they can seek our credential as a first, perhaps entry-level experience for them to not only say to parents who are bringing their children to the center that I'm competent and I'm qualified, but that you can trust me and I know what I'm doing with young children. And I think what we learned in our latest survey of credential holders is that most employers would hire someone with a CDA as opposed to a similar applicant without one. So we know that it makes a difference in the space and that employers are recognizing it as a really definer of competence in our space.
All right. Well, we've got just a minute or two. There's a question that is suggesting, how could we replicate panels like this at the state level? Mike, you mentioned, even having conversations like this, and I mentioned early on that this will be saved. This will be on YouTube. So let's presume here as we wrap up the hour that somewhere down the line on YouTube, there are going to be some guys that are watching this conversation who are considering early childhood education. Want to give you a chance to close out the hour by speaking kind of directly to them. What would you tell them about why this is a fantastic career choice? And Mike, maybe we'll begin with you.
There's a lot of reasons. I can speak for my personal self. It's a great career for a family man. I have two boys. One just started at my school this year in kindergarten. He's right next door to me, which is very, very cool to see him in that environment. But it's a great career to have as a family person. Great hours, great benefits, and you get to see your kids go through the educational system and enjoy that along with them. So just from my personal experience, I think it's just a great opportunity to have a very good foundational career.
Eddie, jump in. What would you tell these guys as they're watching us down the road?
I would say that this is the most rewarding, fulfilling, and inspiring position that you can imagine. And if you are lucky enough to be able to have a role where you get to work with children every day, it is a gift, and it is special, and it's magical, because their interactions with you are as fulfilling as you're teaching them or working with them. And some of my greatest memories are like, Mike had said, when your children are in the building or next to you or in some way connected to you, that you have that connection with them. But I just know that this is by far the greatest job that anyone can ever have.
I agree, Dan. If you want to be a change maker, this is the career path for you. You can change your community one family at a time. You can change this country and how they feel about male teachers in this space. And ultimately, as Eddie and Michael have said, you can change yourself. I think I'm a better father today because I was a teacher of young children.
I think that's a perfect way to close this out. I want to thank Eddie Manuzak, Executive Director of Early Childhood for the Ouachita Intermediate School District in Michigan and co-chair of the AASA Early Learning Cohort, Dr. Calvin Moore, Chief Executive Officer of Council for Professional Recognition, and especially Mike Marshall, who is a kindergarten teacher. And while we are thanking Mike and Cottonwood Elementary, I want to thank Mike's principal, and his superintendent, Peter French, who helped to arrange for this today. And there she is. Look at that. Thank you for helping to arrange. We knew when we were having this conversation that it was we really wanted to have someone who was actively doing this work, but know that the middle of a weekday is a tough time to do that sometimes. So Mike, especially grateful to you and to your support system there at the school for helping to make your participation here possible today.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up the hour. I want to invite you to join us back on Tuesday, November 7th. There is a task force that has been working on issues related to climate change in early childhood education, and we will have 3 members of that task force as they prepare this month to release a final report on their work to unpack some of the conversations that they have been having around climate and early childhood. So I invite you to join us on November 7th and wish you a fantastic afternoon. Thank you for joining us, everyone.